Hi, my name's David, and I was 17 the night my family decided I didn't belong to them anymore. It was pouring rain, and I still remember the sound of my father's voice, cold, sharp. Get out. We don't need you anymore. All because of one lie. A lie my stepbrother made up, and everyone believed. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just walked into the storm. What they didn't know was that the rain didn't wash the truth away. It exposed everything they tried to bury. And 3 hours later, when the police called, that was the moment everything started to crack. But you know what hurt more than being thrown out? Realizing they never really wanted me back. They say you don't forget the night that changes everything. For me, that night wasn't a dramatic crash or a loud goodbye. It was quieter than that. Almost polite. Almost silent. I've lived 3 decades since it happened, built a life with responsibilities, a job, a routine. But that night, cold, wet, and loud with rain, still teaches me about silence and what it costs. I was 17 when it happened, a kid, legally still a minor, but old enough to understand what it means when the people you trust most stop looking you in the eye. When they believe something that isn't true because it's easier for them than facing what is. It was late fall. The kind of night where the air smelled like damp leaves and the roads shimmered under the glow of porch lights. Our street looked like any other in a quiet American suburb. Modest, single-family homes, trimmed hedges, the occasional bark of a dog. From the outside, nothing looked broken. Inside, everything was already cracking. Dinner had been strange, not loud, not angry. Just off. Mom had made baked ziti, her fallback on Thursdays. I remember the smell, garlic, tomato, that creamy layer of melted cheese she never admitted came from a jar. The TV in the den buzzed with some sitcom rerun, laugh tracks echoing faintly. My stepbrother sat across from me. I caught him looking at me once, then quickly away. I didn't think much of it. Just another awkward dinner between people who weren't quite family, no matter what the paperwork said. But there was tension. Something in the air I couldn't name yet, like walking into a room that smells like smoke, but you don't see any fire. Yet. After dinner, I went upstairs to finish an essay. I remember the clicking of the keyboard, the slow drip of the bathroom faucet, the storm starting to growl in the distance. Then the knock came. Not a soft one. A firm, deliberate knock. Dad's kind of knock. I opened my door and found both my parents standing there. Both. That never happened unless it was serious. Dad's face was blank, which was worse than angry. Mom looked like she'd been crying but hadn't decided whether to stop. He didn't yell at first. He just said, "We need to talk." I followed them down to the living room. The TV was off now. The room felt too quiet. That's when he said it. "You know what you did?" I blinked. "What?" "You think we'd let something like that slide?" His voice was tight, controlled, like he was reading a sentence he didn't write but had been told to believe. I remember trying to ask what they meant, but I didn't get far. Mom flinched when I opened my mouth. Dad raised his hand, not to hit me, but in that sharp way that said, "Don't speak." And then my stepbrother walked in, casual, calm. He stood behind them, arms crossed, lips pressed into some version of concern. "That's not true," I said. "I didn't." "Stop," Dad cut in. "Don't insult us with lies." I didn't know what I was being accused of, not fully. Just that it was serious enough for them to look at me like a stranger. Serious enough for them to believe him without a second thought. And then came the sentence, "Get out," Dad said. His voice didn't shake. "We don't need you anymore." No hesitation, no discussion, just done. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask why. Something inside me froze, not out of fear, out of shock, out of this surreal realization that this was happening. I looked at the clock, 8:42 p.m. I looked at the door, rain tapping against the glass. I looked at Mom. She looked away. I left. I didn't pack. I didn't even grab my jacket until I realized the rain was real and soaking through my shirt. The street was quiet, save for the rain smacking the pavement. I walked, no destination, just away. My jacket clung to me, waterlogged and cold. I remember how it smelled. Faint mildew from being in the back of the closet too long. It would be the only thing I carried that night. A soaked, too thin jacket, and the words, "We don't need you anymore," echoing louder than the storm. Cars passed but didn't stop. A neighbor's porch light flickered. Somewhere a dog barked twice and went silent again. I kept walking. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to. Because I didn't know who would care if I did. I didn't call anyone. Who would I call? I just walked, head down, not really feeling anything anymore. It wasn't courage that kept me quiet. It was something else, something dull and familiar. Silence felt safer than pleading. The wet sidewalk blurred under my shoes. The air stung my cheeks. My thoughts stopped forming sentences. I stopped being the kid who lived in that house. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly disposable. Time passed, but I couldn't tell how much. My phone was in my room. My room wasn't mine anymore. I passed a bus stop, empty. A street sign I never read. A cracked sidewalk I didn't remember ever walking before. I kept going. And as I walked, the only thing I felt, really felt, was how quiet everything was. Except the rain. And still, I hadn't heard the worst yet. I didn't know it yet, but that wasn't the worst thing that was going to happen that night. At first, I just stood there. The porch light behind me buzzed quietly. Rain traced slow lines down my back and into my socks. I didn't move, not because I didn't want to, but because I truly believed, honestly believed, that any minute now, the door would crack open, and I'd hear Dad's voice, flat and stiff, "Come back inside." That was how it always worked, right? It had to be the heat of the moment, a misunderstanding, something that would settle once tempers cooled. So I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Time outside the house started to change its shape. I didn't have my phone, but the neighbors' porch clocks were enough. I remember one blinking red numbers through the haze, 9:13, then 9:25. I checked it more than once, too many times. The door never opened. I didn't wander off immediately. I stayed close, pacing a short stretch of sidewalk like I was waiting on a ride that never came. I replayed the argument, if you could call it that, trying to figure out where I went wrong. But the whole thing hadn't felt like a conversation. It was a sentence, a verdict. I tried to think of what I'd say when they called me back in. I had lines ready, polite ones, calm ones. Things like, "I don't know why he said that, but it's not true," and "Can we just talk for a minute?" I thought if I stayed close, they'd see that I wasn't fighting back. I was still being respectful, still part of the family. That belief carried me through the first hour. By the second, something shifted. No call came, no text, not even from my mother, who used to leave notes in my lunchbox when I was a kid. I figured maybe the lights would flicker on, or the porch light would blink twice, a signal to come back. But nothing changed. Other houses on the street started turning off their lights. Curtains were drawn. The neighborhood curled into itself, getting ready for bed. I stood there like an idiot in the cold, my jacket now more sponge than coat. I was wet through, shirt clinging to my chest, water pooling in my shoes. Still, I didn't knock on anyone's door. I couldn't. I wasn't raised like that. You don't drag your family's business onto the lawn, and you definitely don't ask the neighbors to step into it. Besides, what would I say? Hey, my parents kicked me out because my stepbrother lied about something I can't even explain yet. Can I borrow your couch? No. I crossed the street and found a spot under the little plastic roof of a bus stop. It didn't do much, but at least I wasn't standing directly under the downpour. I sat on the cold metal bench and stared across the road at my house. The lights inside the kitchen were off now. So were the upstairs ones. The porch light was still on. That stung a little. It meant someone was still up. They just weren't looking for me. I pulled my jacket tighter, but it didn't help. The wind found its way in anyway, curling around my ribs like ice. I told myself not to cry. Not because I thought crying was weak, but because I wasn't even sure what I'd be crying about. I didn't have words for the feeling yet. I still thought maybe it wasn't permanent. Maybe someone inside was arguing on my behalf. Maybe Mom was talking to Dad right now saying, "You went too far." But deep down, I was starting to know better. I stopped checking the windows. I stopped checking the time. Something in me let go. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No epiphany. No thunderclap. Just this low, steady ache that settled into my chest and told me, they're not coming. Not tonight. Not maybe ever. And that was the moment it became real. This wasn't punishment. This was removal. I wasn't being taught a lesson. I was being erased. So I stopped trying to be seen. I pulled my knees up to my chest, leaned against the glass panel of the bus stop, and tried to make myself smaller. The wind picked up again. The rain didn't stop. It wasn't cinematic or stormy or full of meaning, just relentless. Hours passed. That jacket, I remember its weight more than anything, like it was trying to press me down into the bench, into the sidewalk, into the reality of what was happening. I didn't even feel angry yet. That would come later. Right now, I was just not anything. A blank page in the middle of a book nobody planned to finish. Then, just before midnight, maybe later, I heard it. A distant wail. At first, I didn't think much of it. Could have been anything. Ambulance, fire truck. You hear sirens all the time in the suburbs, usually far off, sometimes closer. But this one got louder. It wasn't racing past. It was slowing down. I sat up straighter. The rain blurred everything, but I saw the headlights approaching, bright and deliberate, casting long shadows across the wet street. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The police car came to a crawl near the curb. I kept my head down, assuming they were just passing through. I didn't understand. Not yet. They weren't just patrolling the area. They were looking for me, and they were here because of my family. When the patrol car pulled up next to the curb, I kept my head low. Rain still dripped from my hood, pooling under my feet. I half expected them to keep going, but they didn't. The door creaked open, and a flashlight beam found my face. "You all right?" the officer asked. I nodded slowly, unsure if my mouth would work. He took a step closer, squinting at me through the rain. "How old are you?" 17. His posture shifted immediately. The casual lean disappeared. He straightened, radio crackling softly at his shoulder. "You live around here?" I motioned behind me. "That house, across the street." His eyes followed my gesture. "Parents' home?" I hesitated. "Yes." The officer glanced back at his partner, who stayed in the car, watching. Then he looked at me again. "You got ID on you?" I shook my head. "All right, hang on." He walked a few steps away, said something quietly into his shoulder mic. For the first time all night, someone was looking at me and waiting for my answers. He didn't accuse, didn't assume. He just listened. I think that's what hit me harder than anything. I'd spent hours standing in that storm, and now, just like that, someone was paying attention. He came back. "Can you tell me exactly what happened tonight?" I kept my voice level. "My stepbrother said something about me. I don't know what, not exactly. But my dad believed him. Told me to leave." The officer's eyebrows lowered. "Did he actually tell you to leave the house?" "Yes. Word for word, he said, 'Get out. We don't need you anymore.'" He nodded slowly. "And you left. Just like that?" I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He looked back at the house again. It was dark now. Porch light off, blinds drawn. Quiet. Ordinary. Then he made the call. He walked back to the car, leaned in, and dialed something on the computer system mounted on the dash. I could only hear pieces, words like juvenile, possible abandonment, check in with parents. No emotion, just official terms in an official tone, but something in the way his voice tightened told me this wasn't routine. He finished the call and turned back toward me. "Can you wait inside the car? Heater's on." I didn't argue. I slid into the back seat, the warmth hitting me like a wave. The seats were scratchy but dry. My jacket squelched against the vinyl. I didn't try to wring it out. He got in the front passenger seat. The driver, another officer, maybe younger, glanced at me in the rear view but didn't speak. The heat made everything feel heavy. My limbs, my eyes. I leaned back and watched the water bead down the windows. "You hungry?" the officer in front asked. "No, sir." He nodded, then went quiet. A few minutes passed before he spoke again. "Just so you know, we're not taking you in. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. Fair?" "Yes, sir." He turned slightly in his seat. "Look, I've seen teens run away. I've seen fights. But it's not common for a parent to lock the door behind their kid without a call, without checking." There was a pause. "So I asked your folks if they told you to leave." I sat up a little straighter. He didn't look at me directly when he added, "They said they assumed you were just being dramatic, that you stormed off." I blinked. "No, I didn't. He told me to leave. I didn't yell. I just walked." The younger officer finally spoke. "No note, no call?" "No, I didn't think I needed to. I thought they'd come out." He nodded slowly. "But they didn't?" "No." The car was silent again. The only sound was the heater clicking as it adjusted itself. "They're not in any kind of trouble yet," the first officer said. "But we're going to have to write this up." "What happens now?" I asked. "Well," he said, "you're a minor. We can't just drop you off. If there's concern about your safety at home, we contact Child Services. Sometimes there's mediation, sometimes temporary placement." "Foster care?" He didn't answer directly. "Could be overnight evaluation, could be we take you home, but with a report on file." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I understood. He looked back again. Do you feel safe going home tonight? I opened my mouth, then closed it. After a moment, I said, I don't know. And I meant it. He accepted that. Okay. We sat there for another minute. The neighborhood was dead quiet. Not even a porch light flickered anymore. Just us, alone, under soft red and blue glows. Then he said it. Calm, factual, with no judgment. Your parents are going to have to explain this, he said. The car ride back felt longer than it actually was. Maybe it was the heat now drying my clothes, or the way the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Maybe it was knowing we were going back to the house I'd just been pushed out of, this time with someone watching. The streets I knew so well, where I rode my bike, where we used to light sparklers on the 4th of July, looked hollow in the dark. Familiar, yes, but colder now. I didn't fidget. I didn't rehearse anything in my head. For the first time that night, I wasn't focused on what I was going to say. I'd already said enough by surviving the silence. When the cruiser rolled up to our driveway, the headlights cut through the front windows. The porch was still dark. No one had come out. But after a few seconds, the porch light clicked on, flooding the steps in a soft orange glow. Behind one curtain, movement. A face pulled away before I could see who. Stay in the car, the officer said. He stepped out and adjusted his belt, then walked to the front door with calm, deliberate steps. I watched as my dad opened the door. He didn't greet the officer, not really. Just stood there, arms crossed, like he'd been interrupted. Their voices were too low to hear, but I could read the body language. My dad's jaw was tight, his eyes darting over the officer's shoulder toward the car. His confidence wasn't gone, not completely. But it wasn't what it had been earlier. The officer didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He just explained, steady and professional, that I'd been found alone in the storm, no phone, no coat, fit for the cold, no one looking. My dad glanced back into the house and muttered something. Then he turned and called out, "Liam, come here." My stepbrother showed up in the doorway a moment later, arms hanging at his sides, hoodie pulled up like he wanted to disappear into it. He didn't look at me. He didn't say anything. The officer motioned for me to come inside. I opened the cruiser door and stepped out slowly. The damp air hit me again, but I didn't flinch. The jacket clung to my shoulders as I crossed the driveway and stepped into the house. It smelled like microwaved leftovers and pine sol. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The officer stood in the middle of the living room now, asking simple, clear questions. What time did you last speak to your son? Were you aware he was outside during the storm? Did you tell him to leave the property? My father's answers were clipped. He walked out on his own. We thought he'd gone to a friend's place. He wasn't locked out. The officer raised one eyebrow. Did you check? My mother, standing off to the side near the kitchen, finally chimed in. We didn't think we needed to. He gets emotional. That was rich, coming from the woman who hadn't said a single word to me before I left. The officer nodded, scribbling into his notebook. And the nature of the disagreement? There was a pause. Then Dad said, it was private, a family issue. Liam shifted uncomfortably by the stairs. His eyes landed on mine for the briefest moment, then dropped. When the officer asked him if he wanted to share anything, he shook his head and mumbled, "No, sir." That was it. No smug look, no smirk. The same kid who had sparked this whole mess was suddenly mute. The officer returned to his line of questions. When I'd left, how long they waited, whether anyone tried to contact me. My father's answers stumbled, The story didn't fit together as neatly under pressure. Timelines blurred, excuses overlapped. The officer didn't challenge him directly, but every pause, every scribbled note made the air feel tighter. I stood off to the side near the entryway. My jacket was still dripping. I pulled it off slowly and laid it over the back of a dining room chair. Water immediately started to pool beneath it. No one said anything, but all eyes flicked toward the sound. That jacket had been with me all night, soaked through, clinging to me like proof. It didn't need to make a scene. It just was. Heavy, damp, real. And for the first time, I realized I didn't have to argue. The silence I'd carried with me through the rain was louder than anything I could have shouted. The truth didn't need my voice. It was starting to show up on its own. The officer closed his notebook and spoke carefully. "We'll need to file a report. This falls under mandatory documentation for a minor found unattended during severe weather. I'll also refer this to the county follow-up unit for review." My dad didn't object. My mom stood frozen, arms folded. Liam was already gone from the room, retreating upstairs like none of this had ever happened. As the officer turned to leave, I looked around one last time. This was still the same house, same walls, same pictures, but I'd never see it the same way again. That was the first time I realized this wasn't going to disappear by morning. The report was filed. No one mentioned it again. No one sat me down. No apology was made. No explanations were offered. That night, with the rain, the flashing lights, and the officer's voice echoing in the hallway, none of it existed in the days that followed. Not in words, anyway. Breakfast was still at 7. My stepbrother still rode shotgun with Dad on school mornings. Mom still asked if I'd done my homework, but never looked me in the eye. Everything picked up right where it left off, except something in me hadn't. The jacket dried slowly on the back of my bedroom chair. I didn't touch it. It held more than water now. They didn't kick me out again. Instead, they kept me close, but from a distance. It's strange how a person can be in your presence every day and still act like you're not quite real. The school counselor pulled me aside that week, not to ask if I was okay, but to confirm what the officer had written in his report. "You're back home now, right?" she said, without waiting for an answer. "Good. Let us know if anything changes." I nodded. That seemed easier. I noticed I was being watched, quietly, from across rooms or in passing comments. But no one talked to me about the night. I was being managed, not heard. Everything was handled, yet nothing had been healed. And even though I was back under the same roof, I could feel the ground beneath me thinning. It took a few more days before old memories started surfacing. Not the big ones, no shouting matches or slamming doors, but the quiet moments I used to dismiss. Like when Liam broke the lamp in the living room and said it was me. Dad had barely asked a question before grounding me. Or the time a teacher called home about a group project gone wrong, and Mom told her I tend to be dramatic when I don't get my way. I didn't push back. I had learned early that defending myself made things worse. At the time, I believed these were just missteps, misunderstandings. But now, they slid into place like puzzle pieces I'd been holding upside down. One afternoon, sitting alone in the corner of the local library, I stared down at my open textbook but couldn't absorb a word. It hit me there. This wasn't the first time they'd chosen someone else's version of the story over mine. It was a pattern. I hadn't been the problem. I'd been the placeholder, the one they could blame when something uncomfortable needed to be swept aside. It wasn't that they didn't love me. That's what made it worse. They just loved other things more. Control, simplicity, the appearance of harmony. And to protect that, I'd been the one made expendable. Later that week, I overheard my mother on the phone. She didn't know I was in the hallway. Her voice was hushed but clear enough. "He's not a bad kid," she said. "Just sensitive. He misread the situation. It got out of hand, but we're working through it." That's how they framed it. I was sensitive. I misread being thrown into the rain. I wasn't a boy locked out of his home. I was a story being corrected in real time. I didn't know what hurt more, what she said, or how familiar it felt to be erased while standing just outside the frame. There were moments I thought about leaving. Not dramatically, just slowly shrinking until there was nothing left to manage. I imagined packing a bag and disappearing, not because I wanted to cause pain, but because I was tired of being rewritten. But something kept me from it. Shame, maybe, or that little flicker of guilt that whispered, "They're still your family." One night, sitting in a booth at a quiet diner, I watched a mother scold her daughter in a way that made me flinch. The girl couldn't have been more than 10, but her face was familiar. That look, part confusion, part restraint. She said nothing, just took the blame, and I saw myself. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept replaying the conversation I'd never had, the apology I'd never get, the space I would never truly occupy in that house. But I also kept thinking about the girl. Something in me shifted. It wasn't loud or immediate, just a slow, steady tilt toward something else, toward not letting this story stay the one they wrote. I'd learned to stay silent to survive, but now I was beginning to wonder what surviving was really costing me. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped protecting everyone else. It didn't happen all at once. Nothing in my life ever did. A few weeks had passed since the night with the rain and the police lights. The air had shifted around me since then. Not colder exactly, but tighter, like the walls were listening more carefully than before. I was still at home, still moving through the same rooms, hearing the same voices. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I was watched. That's what happens when you don't stay in the role they wrote for you. I didn't start a fire. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I started keeping notes. It sounds ridiculous, I know. But when the lies get passed around like sugar at the breakfast table, sometimes the only weapon you have left is the truth and making sure you remember it the way it happened. So I wrote it down. Dates, conversations, who said what time I got home, what time the yelling started, who was in the room, who stayed quiet. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning sanity. I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining everything they kept insisting never happened. Then came the meeting. It was supposed to be a check-in at school, a social worker, my parents, a counselor, just a few adults in a quiet office with faded posters on the walls. I wasn't told until the night before. Mom mentioned it in passing, like a dental cleaning. I nodded and went back to doing the dishes. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I wore the same jacket. The one from that night, still stained at the hem where the water and dirt had dried in strange shapes. I'd washed it since, but somehow that mark stayed. I didn't mind. It reminded me that what happened was real. The school office was too warm. The fluorescent lights too bright. The kind of setting where truth feels smaller than it should. I sat down between my mom and dad. Across from me were the counselor and a district rep I'd never seen before. My stepbrother didn't come, though everyone acted like he had a voice in the room anyway. They started soft, words like adjustment, concerns, open communication. I listened. I nodded. I waited. Then Dad said something I didn't expect. Well, to be fair, he didn't tell us he was outside that long. He could have come back in. It was quiet for a second, like everyone else in the room was holding their breath, waiting to see how I'd react. I didn't shout. I opened my notebook. I flipped to the page I'd written weeks ago and read clearly, "At 8:17 p.m., I walked out the front door. I stood on the porch. No one followed me. At 8:43, I knocked once. No one answered. At 9:12, the porch light turned off. I stayed on the sidewalk until after midnight. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I just looked up and said, 'That's what happened.'" The room stilled. For a second, I believed maybe this would be the moment something shifted. I hadn't accused. I hadn't exaggerated. I had stated facts. Even the counselor leaned slightly forward. The district rep blinked, glanced at his notes. My mother looked like she wanted to speak, but didn't. My dad stared ahead, jaw clenched. And then, "He's been writing that stuff down to twist things," my stepbrother said from the doorway. I hadn't even seen him come in. "He's always done this. Made stuff up, tried to play the victim. He waits until people aren't looking, then pretends something happened. It's calculated." The words landed like cold water. He was ready. He wasn't flustered. He didn't ramble. He spoke with the calmness of someone who had told the same lie often enough to believe it. He even looked concerned, worried, as if for my sake. My dad folded his arms. My mom finally exhaled and shook her head, as if to say, "Here we go again." And just like that, the mood changed. The district rep leaned back. The counselor pursed her lips. No one asked him for details. No one asked me why I hadn't brought this up earlier. They just let the moment pass. Someone said we all needed to move forward with kindness. And someone else mentioned how hard it can be at this age. I don't remember much after that. Just the walk home, where no one spoke. And later that evening, sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at the notebook in my lap, I thought I had done the right thing. I thought being calm would prove I wasn't what they kept saying I was. But the moment I spoke up, they twisted it into something else. Somehow I wasn't hurt. I was manipulative. I wasn't honest. I was rehearsed. And it hit me harder than I expected. I left the notebook open on the desk and pulled the jacket over my shoulders, even though I wasn't cold. My fingers brushed the stain again, faint, but still there. A reminder of everything that had really happened. I thought about throwing it away. I almost stood up, walked it straight to the trash can just to feel like I was done carrying it. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew I wasn't done carrying any of this. Not yet. That was the night I almost decided silence was the only way to survive. But over the next few weeks, I realized silence could also be something else. A tool. A pause, not a surrender. It wasn't that I stopped caring. It was that I stopped bleeding in front of people who called it a show. So I pulled back. I didn't fight every accusation. I didn't correct every sideways glance or fake smiled comment. I went to school. I came home. I answered what I was asked, nothing more. My stepbrother took that as a win. My parents saw it as a return to normal. But inside, I wasn't shrinking. I was watching. It's strange how much people reveal when they think you've gone quiet. At first, it was little things. The way my stepbrother told stories about me when he thought I wasn't close enough to hear. He used the same phrases. He's just sensitive. He takes things the wrong way. You know how he is, like a script, polished, memorized. In the school library, I sat alone sometimes, not because I didn't want company, but because it gave me space to observe. He walked through the halls like someone who'd been handed a badge, confident, untouchable, laughing with teachers, making small jokes that brushed the edge of truth without touching it. One afternoon in the library parking lot, I saw him talking to another student, someone from his circle. They laughed at something. Then I caught part of what he said. He thinks writing everything down will save him. All it does is make him look crazy. And just like that, it clicked. He wasn't worried about truth. He was counting on reactions, on people getting angry, frustrated, too emotional to look credible. And when I didn't react anymore, he didn't know where to aim. That was the first crack I saw. He didn't expect patience. He didn't expect memory. And he definitely didn't expect silence with a purpose. So I turned silence into a strategy. I started documenting more. Not for attention. Not to prove anything yet. Just to stay sane. Dates, phrases, where people stood during conversations, how their tone shifted when authority walked in. I kept everything in a small notebook tucked behind a stack of textbooks in my closet. I didn't show it to anyone. Not yet. There were days it burned in my chest not to speak. Like when Mom told a friend on the phone that we've had a tough time, but the boys are working it out. As if we were wrestling over a video game, not rewriting someone's reality. Or when my dad joked, he's finally learning to let things go. Over dinner. I stared at my plate and let the moment pass. The hardest part wasn't staying silent. It was knowing I could break everything wide open and choosing not to. I wasn't afraid anymore, but I was tired. And I'd learned that tired people don't always fight smart. They fight loud. And loud loses in quiet rooms with polite smiles and paperwork. So I waited. The longer I watched, the more obvious the patterns became. My stepbrother liked control, not questions. He repeated details differently depending on who he was talking to. And he always added just enough emotion to seem sincere, but never so much that someone might dig deeper. I realized I didn't need to expose him. He was already doing that. Slowly. Carelessly. The pressure to maintain the lie was wearing him down. He spoke more often now. Louder. More defensive. Even when no one was accusing him. One evening in the hallway, I walked past him telling our mom, "He's gonna twist it again. Just watch." No one had said anything to him. Not that day. That's when I drew my line. There was one story, one particular lie about that night, the porch light, and what he said to me before I left, that he kept repeating. If he told it again, in front of the right person, I'd speak. Not emotionally, not loudly, just facts, dates, words. Let them do the cutting. But until then, I'd wait. Let him keep talking. Let him think I'd faded back into the background. Because every word he added was another thread unraveling. And the more confident he became, the more I knew he was about to make a mistake. I'd been waiting for this. Not the confrontation, not the collapse, but the overreach. And when it came, it didn't shout. It whispered itself into the room like it had always belonged there. I just had to be still enough to hear it. It was a few months after the storm, a Sunday afternoon carved out for what Mom called just a check-in with someone from the school and a community liaison from youth services. Official enough to make people sit up straighter, casual enough for them to act like it was just a conversation. We gathered in a meeting room at the local resource center, sterile walls, lukewarm coffee, laminated posters about conflict resolution taped crookedly on the bulletin board. My stepbrother showed up in a hoodie too clean to be accidental. My parents had that air about them, smiling too wide, like they were hosting instead of being asked to explain a night no one wanted to talk about anymore. I sat down last. Not because I wanted attention, I just didn't want to be part of the opening act. The woman leading the meeting, Ms. Carson, I think, began gently, like someone peeling back layers of a conversation already rehearsed. She asked my parents to recount their understanding of the incident. My father cleared his throat. My mother nodded along, adding soft qualifiers like, "as far as we know," and "we believed at the time." Then they turned to my stepbrother. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice calm like he was reading a bedtime story. "I just remember trying to help," he began, eyes darting to the adults for approval. "He ran out during the argument. I followed, but he didn't want to talk. It was raining, heavy. I came back inside, told them I couldn't find him. I was worried." He paused for effect. Then, here it came, he added something new. "I even offered to drive around and look for him, but Mom said the roads were too slick, and she didn't want me out either." That was it. A small, quiet lie that didn't match the earlier ones. The first version, the one he told the officer, had no mention of offering help. It had been, "He stormed out before I could stop him." Later, he said he thought I'd just gone for a walk to cool off. Never once had he offered to drive. Never once did he show concern until he realized it mattered. I glanced at my mother, whose brow furrowed just for a moment before smoothing out again. Dad didn't blink. Ms. Carson tilted her head. "Can you walk me through that part again?" she asked kindly. And instead of correcting himself, he doubled down. "I told Mom, let me go look. She said no, so I stayed." That was the overreach, the lie that stretched too far across too many versions, and it landed like a stone dropped into a still lake. Silence. Not discomfort, calculation. I sat there, hands in my lap, and weighed the moment. I could feel that old pull, deep in my chest, the temptation to stay quiet, let it slide, avoid the mess. But I remembered the jacket, the porch light, the way they'd let the story carry on without me in it. Not this time. "I'd like to say something," I said evenly. No one stopped me. I kept my tone steady, not sharp, not pleading. I pulled out a small folder I'd kept sealed in my backpack. No fanfare, just paper. I laid it flat on the table. Ms. Carson leaned in. "These are notes," I said, "from that night, and from conversations after. I didn't share them earlier because I didn't think anyone wanted to hear them." I pointed to a page, dated the night of the storm. At 8:12 p.m., I walked out. He didn't follow. I stood on the sidewalk for almost 2 minutes. No porch light. No one opened the door. I turned another page. At 8:43, I texted my mom. No reply. "The phone records are there." Ms. Carson scanned the pages. I continued, calm and exact. "In the original report, he said I ran out before he could stop me. In the second version, he said I just needed space. Now he says he offered to look for me, but the times don't line up. And no one remembers that offer, because it didn't happen." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at him. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. Ms. Carson took her time. "Have you shared this documentation before?" "No," I said, because I wasn't sure it would change anything. But I'm not here to change minds, just to stop carrying the weight of pretending. My stepbrother tried to speak. The first words came out shaky, then stopped. My father let out a breath, one of those quiet ones that almost sound like irritation. My mother stared at the folder but didn't touch it. "I think," Ms. Carson said gently, "we need to take a pause and review this carefully." There it was, not justice, not yet, but acknowledgement, and it didn't need a fight. Later, while waiting for them to finish their talk in the hallway, I sat alone on a bench by the exit. It was cold inside, artificial. I crossed my arms, pulled my jacket tighter around me. Same jacket. Still had a faint stain near the bottom hem. I traced it with my thumb. I'd kept it for months, not out of nostalgia, but because I wasn't sure what part of me still lived in it. The kid who stood outside waiting to be let back in. The kid who thought love and protection were the same thing. But now, it was just a jacket, not a symbol, not a scar. I didn't toss it, not yet. But I knew I wouldn't need it much longer. As we left the center, no one spoke. No apologies. No outbursts. But there was a shift in the air, the kind that happens when something false finally bends too far to hold itself up. For the first time since that night in the rain, I wasn't carrying this by myself. It didn't all unravel in one day. The consequences came in the weeks that followed, delivered in envelopes, soft-voiced phone calls, and scheduled reviews behind closed doors. No fireworks, no shouting, just a quiet, unglamorous reckoning. The school conducted its own inquiry, and though the results were never fully shared with me, I was told appropriate disciplinary measures had been taken. My stepbrother stopped being invited to certain spaces. He didn't disappear. People like him rarely do. But the ease with which he had once walked through life seemed to dim. He didn't speak to me after that day. Not directly. I didn't expect him to. There were no apologies from him. And maybe that was the most honest thing he ever did. My parents, though, started to reach out in strange little ways. My mother sent a package one day. No note, just cookies and a scarf I didn't recognize. My dad left a voicemail 2 weeks later, talking about the weather, then slipping in, "We didn't handle things well back then." That was as close as he got. I didn't return either gesture right away. Not out of spite, just self-respect. Sometime later, I called them. The conversation was light, surface level. But there was a moment near the end when my mother said, "We want to visit, if that's okay." I paused. Then I said, "Maybe. Not yet." They didn't push. Instead of cutting the cord, I let the rope go slack. Months turned into seasons. Seasons into years. I moved into a modest apartment in a quieter part of town. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen with a crooked drawer, and a window that caught morning light just right. I filled it with plants I kept alive through trial and error. I built a life there, steady, unspectacular, but mine. I worked with numbers now, tucked behind a desk where my peace didn't depend on anyone's mood. I drank coffee from the same chipped mug each morning and read before bed most nights. Some weekends, I wandered through neighborhood streets just to feel the rhythm of my own steps. Trust came back slowly, like light returning after a long winter. There were people I let in, not many. But the ones who stayed knew how to listen without fixing, how to sit with silence. That mattered more than anything. One afternoon, I was cleaning out my closet when I found it again. The jacket, folded, dusty, pressed against an old cardboard box. I hadn't worn it since that night. I sat with it on my lap for a long time. No tears, no anger, just weight, and understanding. It wasn't the jacket itself that mattered anymore. It was what it had carried. The fear, the silence, the small hope that someone would see me. But I didn't need it now. Not to prove anything. Not to remind myself of who I'd been. I didn't burn it. I didn't bury it. I just slid it into a donation bag with the rest of the clothes I'd outgrown. That was enough. Sometimes I think about the boy I was, the one standing outside in the rain, jacket soaked, heart racing. I don't try to silence him. I thank him because he stayed, because he waited long enough for the rest of me to catch up. Healing didn't erase him. It just made room for everything he survived. Family, now, looks different. It's not about bloodlines. It's about presence. It's about people who don't flinch when things get uncomfortable, people who ask questions before assuming answers, people who stay. My parents are still part of my life in their own way. We speak now and then, share photos, exchange safe topics. I don't punish them with distance, but I don't offer blind closeness either. I learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors I choose when and if to open. And now, at the end of this story, at least the part I needed to tell, I think about those watching, listening, the ones who've carried their own silent nights, the ones who never got their jacket back, the ones still standing in the rain, wondering if anyone sees them. I don't have advice. I'm not here to tell you how to rebuild. I just want you to know. I believe you. Some storms don't pass through your life. They show you exactly where you need to build shelter.